The moment I had worked 4 years for, the moment I was walking toward, cracked open like a dry vase. The air conditioning died the moment my sister stood up. All 200 of us in the room felt the temperature spike as the silence landed. My heels clicked on the marble floor, a steady rhythm against the sudden, sharp silence. I was halfway to the podium when, at my graduation ceremony, my sister stood up and shouted. She cheated her way through college. The entire auditorium stared. I kept walking toward the podium, accepted my diploma, and whispered to the dean, who smiled and nodded. But before that pivotal moment, the tension had already been building for months. Right then, as Ariana stood in her row, pointing at me like I was a criminal, I felt the familiar burn of panic. Yet, I did not flinch. Every single person in the room, the parents fanning themselves with programs, the professors in their heavy robes, my classmates in their identical black gowns, all had their eyes locked on me. They weren't seeing Emma Hart, the honors student graduating magna cum laude in psychology. They were seeing a spectacle. They were seeing the person my sister, Ariana Blake, desperately needed them to see. My brother, thankfully, was not present in this chapter of our family drama. Only Ariana, dressed not for celebration, but for execution, and my parents, who were frozen in their seats, exchanging a look too fast for me to decode from the stage. That look carried years of history, years of balancing the quiet, studious daughter against the golden, magnetic one. I didn't break stride. I kept moving, holding together 4 years of work, the late nights, the cold coffee, the sacrifice of my early 20s, with nothing but breath and spine. Her accusations were immense, but I was immovable. The weight of that accusation was immense, but I had been carrying the subtle weight of her sabotage for so long that this public blow, while devastating, wasn't a surprise. It was the calculated final move of a war I hadn't started. Ariana was the light in our family, always louder, always brighter. At every holiday dinner back home in Portland, relatives naturally leaned toward her stories, drawn in by her effortless charm. I learned early how to make myself small so her light could shine without obstruction. But I grew. I stopped being the quiet kid who trailed her and started becoming Emma. By the time I was a junior in high school, my grades were undeniably better. Scholarship letters arrived with my name on them. And when I went off to college, leaving Ariana behind after she dropped out of her graduate program, the distance between us should have created peace. Instead, it created fertile ground for resentment. Now, she stood on the battlefield she created, ready to claim the victory. But what she didn't know was that, while she was planning her attack, I was preparing my defense. While the crowd held its collective breath, waiting for me to shatter or scream or deny, I kept walking. My focus was not on her desperate, flailing face, but on the small, knowing nod I knew I would receive from Dean Matthews. That small nod was the only validation I needed right then, because it acknowledged that the truth, unlike my sister, was patient. It was waiting. My heart was a heavy stone in my chest, but my expression was a smooth, unreadable mask. Every step was a step toward my future. And every step was away from the shadow she had tried to force me back into. I reached the base of the podium, looked up at Dean Matthews, and felt the final, powerful surge of resolve. The public shame she planned to inflict only solidified my decision. I would not allow her last act of cruelty to define my life. The world was staring, waiting for the crack. I would not give them one. I would receive my diploma, and I would execute the final move of the quiet war. I knew then that the fight was not about what she said. It was about what I had hidden, what I had prepared, and what I was finally ready to reveal. The memory of my sister's face, burning with malicious joy, forced my mind back, not to the present chaos, but to the slow, poisonous beginning. I was so fixated on the sight of her being led away by security after the dean's quiet nod that I needed to force my mind back. I had to remember why I was here. 4 years, and what felt like a lifetime away from that small girl, trying to catch Ariana's light. The flashback became my anchor, pulling me from the present chaos to the slow, poisonous beginning. My childhood was a study in contrasts. Ariana was the gold standard, effortlessly magnetic, louder, funnier. Our parents and relatives hung on her every word. When we sat down for family dinners, the gravitational pull was always toward her end of the table. I was the satellite, orbiting her charisma, nodding along, learning the difficult art of minimizing myself so she could shine. This wasn't necessarily cruel neglect from them, but it was an ingrained dynamic. My role was to be the quiet observer, the supporting player to the star. I built my identity around being meticulous and driven, but always in the background. My deepest internal conflict, even now, stemmed from a profound need for external validation, a desperate hope that if I just achieved enough, worked hard enough, I could finally earn a spotlight that was truly mine. The shift, when it happened, was almost imperceptible at first. By junior year of high school, the hours I spent studying in my room, fueled by fear of failure, started to pay off. My report cards edged past Ariana's, who found studying tedious and preferred the glow of social life. Teachers who never knew my name began to call on me. The scholarship letters arrived, stamped with my name, promising a future I had built brick by quiet brick. When the first big scholarship letter came, the one that made college possible, Ariana gave me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. It held the sweetness of fruit that had been left out too long, sugary and slightly rotten. That was the start of the gold cage. She had always been the star, and I had dared to step out of the shadows. College made the distance literal, and I thought, emotional. I packed my duffel bag and a stack of psychology textbooks and left for campus. Ariana, meanwhile, had dropped out of her graduate program after only a semester. A failure she kept carefully veiled in a fog of vague excuses. I truly thought we were on different paths, and the distance would dissolve the rivalry. But that's when the cracks appeared, small, easy to ignore, and therefore, highly effective. The first sign was when my scholarship refund came in short. A missing amount of almost $300. The financial aid office gave me a vague explanation about an administrative fee. It was small enough to dismiss, but it planted the first seed of unease. When I asked my parents if they had spoken to Ariana, they exchanged a look too quick for me to analyze, then changed the subject. Then came the second layer of sabotage, the digital infiltration. An email appeared in my inbox, a plagiarism complaint about a paper I hadn't even written. Then a notice about a canceled tutoring appointment with a person I'd never met. These were small things, easy to blame on the chaos of the university's large system. Or maybe just bad luck. But they built on each other, subtle weight after subtle weight, pressing down on my reputation. I started to feel people watching me in the hallways, with that hesitant, speculative look, as if I were a cracked mirror they weren't sure they should approach. Lena, my loyal roommate, noticed the change in me before I spoke a word. We were sitting in the quiet of our studio apartment one night, the only light coming from the street lamp outside our window. "Emma," she whispered, her voice low. "You're checking your phone like you're waiting for something bad to happen." I didn't know how to explain to her that I wasn't waiting for a piece of bad news. I was waiting for a pattern. I was waiting for the undeniable truth that my sister, the girl who used to braid my hair before elementary school, couldn't possibly be behind all of it. I kept hoping it wasn't Ariana, because admitting that meant admitting a profound, devastating betrayal. Hope has a way of blinding you right before the final blow. I just didn't know that blow would land in the most public way possible. She knew I couldn't defend myself. I knew the conflict was rising, but I was still clinging to the edge of denial. I stopped looking for bad luck and started looking for a pattern, and the darkness only deepened when my roommate, Lena, noticed it first. She was the one who trusted me by instinct, and the fact that even she was questioning the environment around me made the suspicion almost unbearable. I was living inside a room where someone kept dimming the lights, never enough to plunge me into darkness, but just enough to make me question what I was seeing and what I was capable of. Every time I thought the worst was behind me, something new slipped under the door. The first adjustment to my scholarship payments had been followed by a second, larger discrepancy. Then, a notice about a missing form for my final capstone project. A form I distinctly remembered submitting back in November. I spent hours frantically searching my files, the paranoia spiking every time I came up empty. The true escalation happened when my campus account locked me out for repeated suspicious activity. I stared at the login screen in the pale light of my dorm room, my pulse climbing as if the system itself was telling me I didn't fully belong anymore. The financial threats had been upsetting, but this felt deeply personal. It was an attack on my identity, on the years of dedication that account represented. Professor Hale, my capstone advisor and a man I deeply respected, called me into his office next. He folded his hands carefully on his desk, his expression worried. "A complaint came through, Emma," he said, his voice measured. "Someone claims you plagiarized parts of your behavioral analysis report." My stomach dropped like a stone. That report had taken me weeks, fueled by late nights, cold leftovers, and endless corrections. It was one of the proudest pieces of work I had done. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but he raised a hand. "I don't believe it," he assured me quickly, offering a momentary burst of relief. "But I'm telling you so you can prepare." "Prepare for what?" I asked, the words barely a whisper. I knew the answer. Prepare for a war I didn't start, a war that sought to destroy my reputation from the inside out. Whispers began to follow me out of his office and down the halls. A classmate from freshman year, who I used to share jokes with, gave me a strange, assessing look, cold and critical. A girl in my lab group avoided eye contact entirely. Even Lena, sitting across from me that evening, couldn't shake the fear. "You don't think someone's targeting you, right?" she asked, her voice tight with concern. "I don't know," I answered, the lie feeling heavy on my tongue. I did know. I just didn't want to say Ariana's name out loud, because once I spoke the truth, it became undeniable, and I had to face the consequence. I was still emotionally paralyzed by the idea that my sister was actively trying to ruin my life. The breaking point arrived late one Tuesday night, when I found a new message in my inbox. It was an email, apparently sent by me to a faculty assistant, canceling a critical meeting I had been counting on for my capstone review. The tone wasn't mine. The phrasing was aggressively formal, in a way I would never use. The signature was slightly off, but the damage was very much mine. The meeting was canceled, and rescheduling would cost me days, maybe even a week, putting my graduation date at risk. I sat on my bed in the half-light of our studio apartment, scrolling through old pictures of Ariana on my phone. The backhanded comments, the sharp smiles whenever I succeeded, the way she had dismissed my wins as dumb luck. I saw the aimlessness in her life since leaving her grad program, always comparing, always tallying my achievements against her lack of them. Somewhere between those painful memories and the image of that malicious email, the truth formed, quiet, sharp, and undeniable. This wasn't randomness. This wasn't bad timing, this was choreography. Someone was meticulously engineering my downfall, piece by piece. My emotional paralysis shattered, replaced by a cold, hard certainty that I would not be her victim any longer. I was moving from denial to acknowledgement of the threat. Armed with a new resolve to fight back, I couldn't fight ghosts, and I couldn't fight her with emotion. I needed the surgical truth. which is why I sought out a man known for finding ghosts in the machine. Noah Vance. The realization that my sister was actively, deliberately ruining my life was so devastating that it burned away the fear and left behind a core of cold, strategic resolve. I drove home that weekend, not seeking comfort, but to conduct reconnaissance. I found my dad in the backyard, standing by the old cedar fence he'd been meaning to fix for years. He was watering the hydrangeas, acting as if the world wasn't slowly closing in on me. I watched the water trickle onto his worn leather shoes for a moment before speaking. I began, keeping my voice low and level. Has Ariana ever said anything to you about me? About school or the scholarship? He paused, the hose suddenly still. His silence was louder than any accusation. She's been tense, Emma. He admitted, avoiding my eyes. Said you get everything handed to you. I told her that wasn't fair. Of course. The rest of his sentence didn't matter. The fracture was already there, confirmed by his avoidance, and his admission of her profound envy. I didn't press him further. My parents were collateral damage in this war, and I was determined to protect them from the full force of Ariana's malice for as long as possible. He still believed Ariana was complicated, wounded, not dangerous or cruel. I couldn't shatter that belief without irrefutable proof, and I needed Noah Vance for that. Back on campus, I made the call. A friend of a friend had recommended Noah Vance, a freelance cybersecurity investigator who specialized in tracing digital footprints. He wasn't cheap, but the cost of his service was insignificant, compared to the cost of losing my future. Noah was quiet, focused, and highly professional. The first time we met in his sterile downtown office, he just listened. Really listened, while I laid out every strange payment, every canceled appointment, every whisper that had clung to me like smoke. I presented him with the timelines, the dollar amounts, the dubious email headers, trying to keep my own emotions out of the report. When I finished, he didn't offer sympathy or platitudes. He tapped the edge of his laptop and simply said, "If someone's been in your accounts, they left footprints. People always do." 3 days later, he called me back. His shared workspace buzzed with the low hum of old vents and hushed conversations, but on Noah's screen, everything was razor-sharp and clean. "These are your login logs," he said, pointing to a list of timestamps and IP addresses. "Standard access from your campus dorm, your phone, the library. Except here. Those aren't yours." My chest tightened, a band of ice squeezing my lungs. "Where did the access come from?" I managed to ask. "The access came from another device on a home network in Portland," he stated, his voice flat and factual. He scrolled down again. "The same network where your parents live." Something in me curled inward. He wasn't accusing them, not directly. But there was only one person living in that house who had memorized my passwords, my security questions, and my college habits from years of sharing a space and a life. Ariana. Noah scrolled again, revealing another window. "There's more. The payments missing from your scholarship refund. Someone rerouted them twice." He pointed to a list of transactions tagged under my campus account. "And these tutoring accusations. They were sent using a mirrored email. One character off from yours. That's intentional. Intentional." The word felt surgical, cutting through every piece of hope, every excuse I had clung to. The betrayal was complete. The initial dread had been replaced by a cold, hard certainty. I was right, and she was capable of anything. I left the workspace shaking, the phone buzzing in my pocket. It was Lena.
"Are you okay?"
"You've been quiet for days." I couldn't respond. Not yet. I didn't have the emotional airspace. Instead, I drove straight to my parents' house again, parked in the driveway, and stared at the porch light flickering under the early summer sky. My dad found me there about 20 minutes later, looking concerned. "Emma, what's going on?" I didn't tell him everything. Just enough to justify my fear and prepare him for the financial consequences. That scholarship money that went missing. The plagiarism complaint. Someone's been in my accounts, Dad, messing with my life. He swallowed hard. Are you saying? I don't know what I'm saying. I lied, unable to utter Ariana's name. Not until I had everything secured. Because the truth would break him. He hadn't seen what she was doing, because I had spent years covering it up with a smile. But I wasn't covering anything anymore. Back on campus that night, I pulled every file, every screenshot, every odd detail Noah had confirmed. If Ariana wanted to tear down the life I built, I would protect it with everything I had left. I contacted attorney Mira Reyes the next morning, ready to shift the conflict from an emotional feud into a calculated legal action. The emotional fight was over. The strategic one was about to begin. My resolve was now absolute. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a strategist. With graduation 2 weeks away, I entered 2 separate timelines, the celebratory one and the quiet war. The knowledge that I was being actively targeted by my sister was devastating, but it provided an unexpected focus. The emotional turmoil was channeled into cold, meticulous planning. My goal was no longer to defend my innocence, but to secure proof of her malice, and the time for guessing was over. The morning after my meeting with Noah Vance, I contacted attorney Mira Reyes. Mira had a reputation for being crisp, controlled, and utterly ruthless in her pursuit of facts. She reviewed the contents of the file I brought. The login logs, the transaction evidence, the forged email headers, and her face remained perfectly neutral. She asked only one question, not about guilt or motive, but about strategy. When do you want this to stop? She asked, leaning back in her chair. When it's no longer just me she can hurt. I replied immediately. When this becomes a professional, legal problem that she can't manipulate her way out of. That was the crucial shift. I wasn't fighting for reconciliation or even understanding. I was fighting for severance. I was fighting to protect the life I had built from the one person who had devoted herself to tearing it down. Mira understood this immediately. Over the next 2 weeks, we worked in tight, confidential bursts. She helped me draft a summary statement detailing Ariana's repeated acts of sabotage and advised me on the most impactful way to present the evidence. My family remained oblivious. I maintained an emotional distance during the few phone calls, focusing only on superficial graduation plans. My father's admission that Ariana was envious confirmed the underlying motive. But I still guarded the specifics of Noah's data. I simply couldn't bear to be the one to physically hand him the proof that his golden child was, in fact, the architect of my misery. That truth needed to come from the institution, not from me. I hoped the academic board and the subsequent legal process would force that confrontation, softening the blow that came directly from me. I decided the final action had to be taken publicly, during the graduation ceremony itself. I knew Ariana would choose that moment for her last, most spectacular attack. Her whole goal was public shame, and the destruction of my reputation in front of the largest possible audience. If she wanted a spectacle, I would give her one. But I would control the narrative. The public chaos would be the perfect cover for the quiet, official transfer of evidence. I spent hours alone, organizing the final document. It was a single packet, containing the most damning evidence. The rerouted scholarship payments. The IP address logs traced to the Portland home network, and the mirrored, malicious email I hadn't recognized. I slipped the sealed envelope into the inner lining of the gown I would wear on graduation day, careful to position it perfectly so it wouldn't be noticeable. I labeled it clearly, 819, an administrative code that wouldn't mean anything to anyone but me and the dean. 2 weeks passed like I was living in 2 timelines at once. In one, I was a normal graduating student returning my dorm key, finishing my final exams, and trying on my cap and gown in front of the mirror with Lena. We talked about plans to move out of the city and find a small place in Corvallis, where the air was clean and the noise level was low. In the other timeline, I was a coiled spring, preparing for a quiet war that Ariana didn't know she had already lost. The night before graduation, I barely slept. The sky outside my studio was a deep, cloudless blue, the kind that made the world feel paused, expectant. I laid out all the components of my defense. The sealed envelope of evidence, the printed logs Noah had verified, and the capstone summary that represented 4 years of honest work. My hands didn't shake. Not anymore. They had the cold, steady resolve of someone finally stepping out of survival mode and into the role of the aggressor. I was no longer reacting to Ariana's chaos. I was initiating the endgame. At sunrise, I slipped the envelope into its hiding place in my gown, zipped up my travel bag, and walked out the door. The dread that had been a constant companion for months was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of purpose. I was ready for her spectacular failure. Because I knew I held the proof that would dismantle her argument, the second she finished speaking. My careful preparation was about to give me the ultimate control. The university auditorium buzzed with everything I'd worked for. I knew Ariana would choose her moment, and I knew I had to be ready to act, while the world was watching. Arriving at the venue felt like walking onto a theater stage, where I was the only person who knew the script. The air was thick with perfume, nervous energy, and the heavy scent of old wood paneling. Students hugged each other. Parents fanned themselves with the glossy programs. Faculty lined up in their stiff, formal regalia. Everything looked normal, festive, hopeful, and underneath it all, a slow pulse of dread tapped in my chest, a rhythm I had come to live by. It was not fear of Ariana, but fear of what she would force me to reveal, fear of the collateral damage to my parents. When my family arrived, I saw it instantly. Ariana was not dressed like someone attending a graduation. She was dressed like someone hosting the event. She wore a stark, white blazer that stood out sharply against the black of everyone else's academic robes, dramatic makeup, and a posture that was too rehearsed. She scanned the room, her eyes darting and hungry for the attention she hadn't yet earned, but felt entitled to. She was looking for a stage, and she had found one. My mother waved at me first. Too brightly, her smile strained. My father hugged me tight, lingering for a moment, a silent message that he sensed something fundamental and awful was coming. He still didn't know the depth of the proof I carried, but he knew the temperature of the air had dropped. Ariana stood behind them, arms folded, an accessory to their concern. "Congrats," she said smoothly, leaning in just slightly. Her voice was too sweet, like a trap. "Big day." "Yeah," I replied, meeting her gaze, keeping my own voice even and utterly devoid of emotion. "Huge." Her smile flickered, sharp, predatory. For a brief second, I saw the entire, twisted plan in her eyes. She didn't come to celebrate the 4 years I had sacrificed. She came to strike. She wanted to stand in the middle of my success and burn it all down. I took my seat on the stage with the honors students. From up there, the auditorium floor looked like a single, breathing organism. The spotlights warmed my face, and a strange, powerful calm settled in my bones. I was ready. Dean Matthews, a tall, kind man in his 60s who had personally guided my capstone work, met my eye from his seat at the center of the faculty row. We had spoken the night before. I had gone to his office, presented the initial findings from Noah Vance, and explained the calculated risk I was about to take. He knew everything. He knew about the redirected funds, the fabricated complaints, and the fact that I was walking into a public ambush. He gave me the slightest, nearly imperceptible nod, a shared secret that transcended the ceremonial pomp. The understanding in that gesture was monumental. It wasn't just trust. It was complicity in my strategy. The ceremony began. Speeches, applause, music swelling and dipping. My name, Emma Hart. was alphabetically toward the end of the honors students list. This meant Ariana had a wide open stage of time, at least 1 hour, to decide exactly how she would ruin the day. The pacing slowed agonizingly. Every minute felt like a measure of gasoline she was pouring on the fire she was about to light. I kept my eyes fixed forward, listening to the platitudes about the future, about hard work, and about community, all while knowing a violent disruption was imminent. I observed my sister from the corner of my eye. She sat forward on the edge of her seat, fidgeting with the program, impatient. She had the look of someone whose energy was too big for the room. Someone craving the spotlight, but unable to wait for her turn. She didn't want a turn, she wanted to seize mine. The student speaker finished. The first row of graduates crossed the stage. I mentally reviewed the steps: walk, accept, lean, whisper, turn, exit. The path was clear, but the moment was precarious. I wondered, briefly, what my family was feeling right then. Were my parents still exchanging those quick, desperate glances? Was my father already bracing himself for the explosion he sensed coming from his favorite daughter? I pushed the thoughts away. I couldn't afford empathy for the architect of my downfall, not yet. My name was called. The alphabetical had reached the H's. My heart hammered, a sudden, frantic rhythm that felt impossibly loud in the silence I was trying to preserve. I rose from my seat on the stage, the inner envelope of proof resting against my ribcage. The moment was no longer about a degree. It was about defining my own truth. The confrontation was seconds away. Then I heard it. The chair scraping backward. The sound that ripped the fabric of the ceremony. The moment had arrived, and I would not flinch. Ariana rose, slamming the chair against the carpet behind her. She didn't whisper. She didn't hesitate. She delivered her line with the perfect, booming clarity of someone who had rehearsed this moment hundreds of times. She cheated her way through college. The sound tore through the auditorium. Applause stopped mid-clap. Faculty froze in place. I could see bright rectangles, phones, lifting instantly across the audience, capturing the exact spectacle she wanted so desperately. She doesn't deserve that diploma. Ariana shouted again, louder this time, pointing directly at me with a rigid finger. She lied. She manipulated the system. Ask anyone. Dozens of faces rotated toward me, a sea of expressions shifting from joy to shock, and then to something more complicated: concern, confusion, raw curiosity. Every single eye was asking the same question: is it true? I stood, drawing a deep, steady breath that felt cold in my lungs. I knew I couldn't fight her on her terms. Screaming back would only confirm the chaos she represented. Silence was my only weapon. Every step down the aisle felt deliberate, measured, a kind of countdown. The click of my heels against the marble floor was the only sound that registered above the buzzing silence left by Ariana's outburst. Students shifted to let me through. Some whispered, some stared openly, and a few looked away entirely, as if my humiliation might be contagious. But humiliation was not what lived in me anymore. It was purpose. It was the fierce certainty of my own truth. I didn't look at Ariana, not because I feared what she would say next, but because I already knew everything she was about to lose. She had chosen her moment of maximal vulnerability for me. I was choosing my moment of maximal power for her. The dean waited at the podium. He stood like a beacon in the storm. His face was steady, perfectly composed, his hands resting lightly on the stack of diplomas. The only fixed point in the room. When I reached him, the room was still pulsing with Ariana's accusations, when his voice, when he spoke, was calm, cutting through the residual tension. Emma Hart, he announced, using my formal graduation name. I accepted my diploma, the heavy parchment solid and real in my hands. 4 years of effort crystallized. I lifted my chin, looked him directly in the eye, and leaned in just an inch. My voice was a final, calm counterpoint to the storm Ariana had unleashed. It's under my seat. I whispered, keeping my voice low enough that only he could hear. The sound swallowed by the folds of his regalia. The envelope marked A19. He didn't flinch. He didn't ask for clarification. He simply smiled, small and knowing, and nodded. That nod was the quiet beginning of the end. Behind us, security personnel began to move discreetly. A faculty member approached the row where Ariana still stood, chest heaving, her dramatic makeup beginning to crack under the heat of her performance. She didn't realize the room was no longer hers. Not after the dean's nod. Not after the evidence waiting beneath my chair. As I walked off the stage, the energy in the auditorium shifted seismically. The whispers changed in pitch and focus. A woman in the second row lowered her phone, frowning not at me, but at Ariana. A professor shook his head, his expression shifting from shock to disapproval. A reporter for the local paper, sitting near the aisle, leaned forward, scribbling furiously into his pad. Ariana sensed the change, too. "What?" she barked, her voice wobbling, desperation creeping into her polished exterior. "You all saw it." She didn't deny anything. She just stood there. She didn't understand. Sometimes silence is not an admission. Sometimes silence is strategy. Security reached her row. A tall, uniformed officer spoke softly, offering her a choice: either step out quietly or be escorted. But Ariana had no concept of quiet. She needed noise. "You're all blind," she screamed, pointing again at me, trying to reclaim the attention I had just stolen. "She's been lying for years." Her voice cracked first. Then her hands, which she wrung helplessly. Then, the control she'd always believed she had over me, over our family, over the narrative. The crowd wasn't with her anymore. They had seen me walk, calm and steady, accepting the proof of my honest work. They had seen the dean nod. They had seen Ariana unravel. And unravel she did, collapsing into a spectacular display of thwarted rage. The security staff gently guided her toward the side aisle. It wasn't forceful. It was simply the natural conclusion of her own choices. When she reached the doors at the back of the auditorium, she turned one last time, her eyes hot with disbelief and pure fury. "You think this is over, Emma?" she spat, the sound barely carrying across the vast space. "You think that little whisper makes you innocent?" I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I gripped the diploma in my hand, feeling the satisfying weight of my achievement. Knowing that the truth was already moving quietly, legally irrevocably forward. I didn't look back at the chaos she'd caused. The fight wasn't over. But the terms of the fight were finally mine. I walked straight off the stage, through the side curtain, and into the cool, quiet space backstage. Dean Matthews followed minutes later, holding the envelope I had hidden in my gown. "This is serious, Emma," he said gently, the seriousness in his voice cutting through the celebratory atmosphere surrounding the hall. "So was what she did," I replied, meeting his gaze. He nodded, his face confirming his support. "You did the right thing." Mira Reyes, my attorney, arrived moments later, her presence crisp and controlled. A complete contrast to Ariana's hysteria. She quickly reviewed the contents of the envelope, the log statements, the financial summaries, the digital report from Noah Vance. Every piece pointed in one direction, leaving no room for doubt or misinterpretation. "She won't be able to spin this," Mira confirmed, snapping the file shut. "Not in front of the academic board, and certainly not in civil court." Her public display just gave us the clearest evidence of motive. And just like that, the final stage of Ariana's calculated plan collapsed. It wasn't because I shouted or fought her on the floor of the auditorium, but because I refused to fight on her terms. The investigation launched the very next morning. By the end of the week, Ariana was officially banned from campus pending a full review. 2 professors came forward with suspicious emails they had previously dismissed. The scholarship office traced the rerouted payments directly to accounts tied to her device. When Noah submitted his clean, concise digital report, The board didn't need more than a single meeting. Ariana's sabotage was undeniable. Her outburst at graduation, the very spectacle she thought would destroy me, became the clearest evidence of her obsession and malicious intent. In the quiet after the storm, something unexpected happened. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. The anxiety that had been a constant companion, the deep, seated fear of inadequacy, began to recede. My parents didn't take the news well. There was shock, followed by a profound denial, and then quiet, heavy acceptance when the paperwork left absolutely no room for imagination. My dad called one evening, his voice thick with a sorrow that went beyond simple disappointment. "I should have seen it," he whispered. I didn't blame him. Ariana had always known how to hide her malice. In the spaces where love blurred into assumption. I moved to a small apartment in Corvallis soon after. Nothing fancy. But sunlight poured through the windows every morning, a constant reminder of the new start. I bought a second-hand wooden table. Adopted a perpetually grumpy cat, who immediately took ownership of every chair, and let my life become blessedly simple again. For the first time in years, my days weren't shaped by fear or second guessing. I studied for my licensing exams, I walked through the small town park, and I breathed deeply. Little by little, the space Ariana once filled with chaos and envy became something gentler room to rebuild myself on my own terms. If there's one thing I learned, it's that telling the truth isn't about winning an argument. It's about finally stepping out of the shadow someone else built for you. Ariana's choices shape my pain, but they don't shape my future. I built that myself, piece by piece, with proof, patience, and a refusal to shrink any longer. I finally chose self, worth and inner peace over the need for external validation, and that was the true graduation.